Welcome, everybody. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We're waiting for more people to join. Everybody's been logging on, so we'll be starting in just a minute. Everybody is muted. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes in case you're wondering why it's quiet, waiting for more people to join. All right, looking like we're getting a critical mass, and it's a few minutes after 10, so we're going to kick things off here. Thank you all for joining us for our third Help for the Helpers webinar series today. We're going to be hosting one more next week that we'll be talking about later in the call with the LA County and the city, but today we are joined by Annie Chang, Director of the NFF. Regina, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, thanks, Aaron. And good morning and welcome, everybody. You know, when we titled this series, Making Sense of Emerging Financing Options for Nonprofits, we had no idea that it was going to be so dynamic. And so every day in this series, we've done our best to make sure that we answer the questions that are coming up most often from most of you. And we're very excited to have the Nonprofit Finance Fund today to help us think about, really at the core of this, what are the decisions that are going to be best for you as you think about the financial picture for your organization, and then how do you talk to funders and investors about that. So we know you're probably pretty overwhelmed at this point with everything that's happening in the economy and with the health of our nation. But for today, thanks to our sponsors, we get some time to just think about what works best for you. The sponsors that made this possible are Citi, the LA County Office of Strategic Partnerships, LA in Sync, and the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation. Many of you may not know that there are 600 people registered today, and that is in part due to our partners at the LA Chamber of Commerce, Southern California Grantmakers, the LA Economic Development Corporation, and our team at the Center for Nonprofit Management for spreading the word. The really important piece today is that Annie Chang is going to help you think about how to tell your story and share some tools that are valuable that NFF have developed. So excited to turn it over to you, Annie.
Great. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Aaron, for all your coordination efforts and CNM efforts and for all the partners making this possible. We know this is a very challenging time for many leaders across the country, and we're really excited to be here today to hopefully provide some thought partnership as you as leaders are thinking about making decisions and trying to really think about the financial sustainability of your organization through this crisis. A little bit about NFF. We are a nonprofit ourselves. We are a national organization that provides financial services. So we are a community development financial institution and do lending to nonprofits across the country. I'm with our advisory services practice, where we specifically partner with nonprofit leaders in being able to strengthen their financial management practices and one-on-one engagements and trainings and webinars such as this. And we also list up what we learn through different writings for the field, and we serve as an advocate for nonprofits based on what we understand are really the financial challenges that organizations of all sizes face, and really try to be an advocate and a partner to philanthropy as they work to be better grant makers and partners for you all. So for today, before kind of diving into some best practices that we wanted to share today, I wanted to share a little bit about what we heard. NFF, we typically do a national nonprofit survey every 2 years. And this, because of COVID-19 and just the crisis that we knew a lot of organizations were going to be facing, we did a really quick survey on March 18th, opened it up for 2 days, had 500 responses across the country. And what we heard may be a lot of what you all are experiencing on the phone today. Within just a week, in some places of social distancing, there were already canceled events, revenue, not sure if they're going to be able to retain staff, unsure how to stabilize, unable to provide essential services. There were some healthcare service providers that couldn't access PPE directly during that week. Folks were feeling short on cash to be able to bridge to the government grants that they knew were going to come in. So just to say that you all are not alone, there's clearly, like Regina said, so much interest in this topic, and to hopefully find some comfort when I know we're all socially isolated, to know that, there is a whole sector here that's going to be working together and advocating with our leadership to get this sector supported through all of this. So NFF, as we have worked with organizations for over 40 years as a nonprofit, felt that there's really a framework for how to support the sector through COVID-19. It starts with response, and those are those immediate reactions that organizations are going to need to take in order to ensure the continued operations and make sure that services are still provided to the communities that have always needed us. And then moving into recovery, which is once we can get through this period, what does it look like for our organizations to go back to normal? What does normal mean? Correcting for any lost revenue that's happened during this period, and trying to understand, did we actually have increased expenses because we actually had a spike in demand for our services, and trying to just normalize them during that period. And then thinking into the long term around resiliency. This is a point that NFF has always been an advocate around for this sector, is how can we set up organizations so when the next crisis comes, they're in a state, and we're all in a state where we can withstand some of these risks, and being able to be in a position where we can make decisions that are thoughtful and long-term, and not necessarily have to be so reactive to the immediate. And these are all things that we know that they overlap, and that we are bringing to think about, despite needing to specifically respond, which is what we're going to focus on today. So 3 steps that we're offering to the field that nonprofits can take right now around financial decision-making is understanding your financial situation. I'm going to talk more about each of these quickly on the following slides, then open up time at the end for questions. Determining and monitoring your options, as well as communicate early and often about your needs to your stakeholders, and that's both your funders, your board members, your employees, and your clients as well. So if we take a dive into each of these, understanding our financial situation, when organizations and leaders are facing what could have been just a stop in revenue, those canceled events, those services that weren't able to be delivered because of social distancing, what is it that organizations should be thinking about to understand their current situation and what they need right now? We would offer doing a cash flow projection, if you haven't already, is a really good way to start. There's a link here to a template that we use with all of our clients and nonprofit leaders for them to be able to quickly fill out what they understand to be some of their cash needs over the next couple of weeks. Given the current period, the guidance we're giving is to try to really understand your cash flow for the next 13 weeks and what it's going to take to get through some of the uncertainty we still have about social distancing, but then also to understand the next 6 months and 9 months and a year to understand what needs you may have. And this is going to help inform any debt needs that you have, which I'll talk briefly about also. But when we talk about doing a cash flow analysis and a cash flow projection, it's really understanding how much cash is available based on the cash going out and the cash coming into your organization over a given period of time. You would start with understanding how much cash do you have today, and that's what's typically in your checking account. And it's not going to be your accounts receivables or things that are tied up in long-term investments. And you would likely want to understand how your cash is restricted, but this is a period of time where we're going to offer for you to go back to your funders and talk about those restrictions if those are things that can be lifted right now. We would highly recommend that, having that conversation. After understanding how much cash you have today, the projections would mean understanding what expenses do you need to pay and when. So those are those costs going out. Maybe it's vendors that you need to pay. Likely it's payroll. That's something that is going to be top priority to get done when you need to pay that out, but understanding the timing of that over the next couple of weeks. And then putting that against the cash coming in. What are those cash sources that you understand are going to come in next week, the following week, anything that is projected that's maybe in accounts receivable right now that is going to turn into a check in the next couple of weeks, and timing that all out. And you would really do that in that cash flow projection, and then showing where are those places where you will need some support to get you through. And when those places where you're going to need some support, those months where you're going to have less cash on hand than you need to be able to pay your expenses, it's going to be a question for a lot of leaders around, is debt the right option for you right now during this crisis? And, for us, debt is a financial obligation that you will need to repay. Typically, it comes in the form for a responsive time like this as a line of credit that's bridging accounts receivables for yourself. Those cash checks that are going to come in, but there might be delays, perhaps on the government side because there are delays in being able to process those checks for you, but it's coming in, or potentially a bridge loan because there's a large grant that's going to be coming in also, but you need some cash to tide you through because you have immediate expenses before you get that grant check coming in. A question to really understand for organizations that we highly encourage you to think about and do your diligence around is what's driving your need for capital. When you're thinking about pursuing debt, is it a cash flow issue, which is just due to timing, that the cash is going to come in, that there is some time period where a check is going to come in, and you just need to be able to have some runway and the cash to be able to bridge to that? Or is it a cash issue? Is it actually a loss of funding that's going to be producing a cash shortage for your organization, and that you don't really have a predictable time of when that's going to come in? Because what we don't want to see organizations do at this point is to borrow to the extent where it's going to put yourself in financial risk of not being able to repay. And that's where we think about what is the feasibility of repayment. Do you understand when you'll be able to have the funds to be able to repay this loan? And specifically, if you're looking at different sources of debt, to do your diligence around those sources, to understand what the terms are. And by terms of a loan, we mean what is the interest rate? When do you need to repay it? Are there any prepayment penalties against the debt? And for you to have a feasible plan for repayment. We think that debt can be a great tool for organizations, but it should be used judiciously and with a plan. And will the cash come in soon enough for you? For us, typically, before this COVID response, for organizations to access a line of credit from NFS, it would take maybe 3 months between the initial time of inquiry to actually receiving the cash funds transferred. And is that actually going to meet the needs that you have, depending on the sources of the debt? And I should back up to say that debt could be a loan, but it could also be running on your credit card charges, borrowing from your board members. These are all things that we know leaders are probably thinking about, but we would ask these same questions of all of those sources before you take that out, and a conversation to have on your leadership team and with your board also. I recognize there's questions coming in. I'm going to keep moving through this, Erin, if that's okay, and then we can answer questions at the end. But for everyone asking questions, please keep them coming in, and we will be able to address them once we get through just a couple more slides. Second step for nonprofit leaders to take right now: determine and monitor your options. There's probably a lot of things keeping you up at night right now, fears, but maybe hopes too. And what we like to offer is a scenario projection is a great way to put those questions that you have, those thoughts about what could happen, into the financial implications of what that would actually look like. So a scenario projection actually quantifies and defines the financial impact of both risks and opportunities. And then seeing that gives leadership a chance to really reflect on what are the decisions you would make and understand what are the implications if you were to make those decisions. It provides decision makers a chance to be thoughtful about those implications before they actually have to make that decision. So before just quickly having to lay off staff, thinking about the long-term implications. Does that mean that there's other projects that aren't going to get done at the end of the year? Are there other things that that staff is doing? And the scenarios that we would typically offer right now that may be the most straightforward for leaders to do is a current situation about how you're operating right now, a best case scenario, which in this case, if social distancing is really driving your fears, best case scenario is maybe that operations start to go up towards normal, maybe the end of May. I have no idea. I'm just saying this as a best case scenario. I'm not a public health expert around when this is actually going to be. But worst case scenario could be, if it goes into July or August. And then for you all to think about those best and worst case scenarios, what will that mean for us financially if we have to put it off our galas until the fall or until 2021, if we have to put off some of our expenses to later also. And then putting those down into numbers helps and empowers leaders to be able to make decisions that are informed by actual data. And also just helps you to perhaps feel better to see, is it as bad as you thought it would be once you put it down into numbers? There is a link here for a blank template, an Excel template, to support an initial round of scenario planning that can be customized by your organization. And lastly, we would offer that you think about communicating early and often about your needs. This isn't the time to be quiet about what you need or what you're going through, because everyone's going through it right now. We would offer that having your financial story together, understanding what is your current cash flow, what are your best and worst case scenarios, those are all part of your financial story. To bring that data to all of the is going to strengthen what your ask might be, or whether you are trying to garner support for a decision you're trying to make. Those are the data that comes behind that story or that request. So when you're talking to your funders, we are encouraging everyone, please go to them and talk to them about the restrictions on your funding streams right now. Understand and request, and just let them know. It would help so much if that could just be turned into general operating for me right now, because I just need to figure out what our organization can do to keep our staff on payroll for the next couple of weeks. And removing those restrictions is going to help significantly. Are there emergency funds available? We know that different funders together right now are making different grant funds as well as loan funds available. And this is a great time to talk to your funders, especially if you understand what your needs are, to see if that's something that they might be able to help you with during the situation. And stressing the importance of supporting reserves and, like I mentioned, those unrestricted operating grants. This is the time where philanthropy is really starting to understand the financial needs of organizations. And this is the time to tell your story of how it's going to support the services that you do in your mission. Talking to your board, this is something hopefully everyone's doing right now also, is to let them know what your priorities are for the organization. And get them on board with that, and have them understand that you know what the financial situation is right now, and what the upcoming weeks might look like. That might help with the conversation around using any of your reserves to support your current operations. or potentially taking out debt. This is a conversation you'll want to have with your board. We specifically have a board resolution up on our resource page also, in case you and your board do want to pursue any of the debt sources right now to get that support from your board. And lastly, talking to your staff. No information can be even scarier for staff right now. So I think being able to offer to them what you know about the current situation, keeping them up to date, understanding what you are pursuing for response and for recovery is going to help staff feel confident that there is a path forward for the organization. We have linked here a guide for telling your financial story. It is just some questions that you can think about as you're preparing to share your situation with any of your stakeholders. And there may be others besides these that you want to share with. Those are really the 3 steps we wanted to offer, the specific links to tools. I'll say that we also have a really great article to philanthropy that our CEO drafted, or that published in Chronicle Philanthropy, about the 6 steps that funders can take right now to support their grantees through this crisis. And top one is make them general operating grants, anything that you have right now, and give as much flexibility as you can. If it means asking for extensions, asking for more flexibility, these are all things that are on the table for you in discussions with your funders. And other blogs about supporting nonprofits that largely summarize what I shared with you today, as well as those templates. And there's also videos on how to use the templates, like the cash flow projection tool and the scenario planning tool. And in addition to that, NFF is going to be hosting a series of publicly available webinars also. There's one that's going to be a deeper dive around debt for the nonprofit sector, happening Friday the 10th, which is tomorrow. And then 2 next week around managing through uncertainty. That's going to be an expansion on what I shared today. That's going to give some more thoughts and tools for leaders to use. So feel free to click on these links and register for those. They just came out this morning, so hopefully they're working. This is hot off the presses. And the last thing I wanted to share, which I think I don't know if Regina is aware as well, is that NFF launched a $25 million COVID response fund in New York in partnerships with philanthropy. It was a loan fund that was complementing about $75 million in grant funding that philanthropy put together in New York for New York nonprofit organizations. I think it's specifically for health and human service agencies and arts organizations. But what I wanted to share is that NFF is actively trying to bring a similar model to Los Angeles, knowing that there's not going to be enough resources from the SBA funds that's specifically carved out for nonprofits. So we're actively in these conversations with our philanthropic partners to bring a similar fund, as well as to government partners also, to bring that fund to support the sector here. With that, there's probably some questions that Erin wants to pose, but thank you all so much for everything you're doing.
Annie, I just wanted to echo what you were saying for everyone listening out there. Philanthropy is working hard to provide as much flexibility as possible. If you haven't talked to both the corporate funders and the private philanthropists, they are open to listen and work with you. It's a good time to be talking about opportunities. And so I'll get off and let you answer questions, but we're also seeing that, these loans are not for everyone. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are hearing that from a lot of funders also. So please know that this is the time to raise those conversations, and hopefully they're asking you. But if they aren't, please feel free to have those conversations.
Awesome. Well, let's take some questions now. If you haven't submitted a question yet, please use the Q&A widget. That'll make it as easy as possible. We'll try and pull questions from the chat if we can. But first thing, just to head off, the most common question we're getting, you cannot click the link on the screen right now. That doesn't work, unfortunately, but we will be sharing this slide deck after the webinar. We've been sending daily emails after the webinars with the slides from the day and a link to the recording. But I think that a lot of people did not get the one after Tuesday. So Later today, we'll be sending a follow-up email through MailChimp. I think I might have tried to BCC too many people, might have gotten stuck in the internet tubes a little bit. But we'll be sure to include the link to every recording that we've done and all of the resources mentioned. So we will be providing the comprehensive access to everything that we've been mentioning. But we've got some questions coming in now, so let's get over to our questions. First off, there was kind of a basic overview question that we definitely covered on our previous webinars, but maybe Annie would be helpful just to give a little overview. Somebody asked just, where are these loans generally coming from? This may be a high level question. Know that there are foundations that have loan programs, but there are government programs as well. So maybe just kind of a brief high level overview of what's available from, SBA and the government side, and then sort of private loans and emergency funds.
Perfect. Thank you, Erin. And thank you for raising that question too to the participants. The SBA support that's coming from the CARES Act includes some loan options, including the Economic Injury and Disaster Loan Program, which is not forgivable, as we learned from both of the webinars earlier this week. But it is a source of capital for nonprofits right now. You would apply specifically on the, actually I think I have a slide here. You would specifically apply here at the SBA site. I think that was very clear from the SBDC person that shared on Monday. And for the Paycheck Protection Program, which is those 8 weeks of largely payroll that you can get a loan for from the CARES Act, you would apply with your bank, your creditors, local community banks, and that will allow up to 8 weeks of that payroll to be able to be given to you in the form of a loan that would be forgivable. But we are hearing that these resources are going to be oversubscribed. So our guidance is, if you can apply and it's something that you need and you have, please do apply, but don't bank on it necessarily, just given that how much uncertainty there is around how quickly these resources are going to go. If you haven't applied already and you think that you'll need it, please apply now, and largely for the PPP program because it will be forgivable. And also in addition to that, foundations, I think different foundations and philanthropy are coming together with not just grant resources, but also capital resources, which would be loan funds. And that would serve in a similar purpose as PPP, but to be able to tide over some of the immediate expenses that you may have. But the way that ours have been set up and that we're encouraging philanthropy to set it up is to have it be highly flexible and supported, so that if it cannot be repaid, that there will not be any penalty to the borrower. And from our fund in New York, philanthropy is very on board with that. There is not anything in Los Angeles right now that I'm aware of that is a philanthropy-backed loan fund, but like I shared, we are actively trying to get that together. But definitely worth a question to your funders. I don't know if folks here are from outside of LA also on the call, but definitely, is there any loan fund that you know of that can support me? Because I know that there are some expenses that I just need to get tied over until my checks start coming in.
That actually segues. We had a number of questions about the NFF fund that will be coming to LA from New York. A couple of questions on that. One, is it going to be limited to Los Angeles specifically, or is it going to be Southern California in general? Take that one first.
That's a great question. What we're working on is, I should say, NFF, we are a national CDFI based out of New York in Manhattan, but we have offices and we have strong partnerships locally in different places across the country. Los Angeles is one of those places. And so we are actively talking with partners. There is no specifics around what the geography would be, but it's literally like you're getting the latest news from us, and that we are trying to develop that right now. So once more information is actually solidified around that, we will definitely share it with Regina and Erin to be able to put it out to this group.
Cool, some more questions on that. Somebody mentioned that they're pretty sure that the New York fund requires that there's already government funding in place, and was curious if that was going to be a requirement as well for the LA fund.
I'm not as familiar with the specifics because I'm not on our financial services side. But if someone has said that, I would want to go back and check that also, or I'll check that with my team. But I can't say for certain whether that will be a requirement or not in Los Angeles. I'll say that NFF, we're really trying to put together the capital from philanthropy to meet the needs as best as possible. And I can't answer that question right now, I'm sorry.
No problem. For people that are interested in learning more about that fund when it comes to LA, what's the best way for them to stay connected and get the latest information on that?
You can go to our, this is not going forward, our resource page here that is going to have the latest around what funds we have available. Right now, it's just that New York fund, but if any other funds become available, then that will be posted there. And we will be sending out announcements also. You can sign up for our newsletter there. You can follow us on LinkedIn, or I believe I just heard we have a Facebook page also. And so those announcements come out like as soon, like the New York announcement, as soon as the contract was signed, that it went out. So please follow us. I'll say that there's also conversations about national funds as well. And I just thought it would be important to bring to you all that there is potentially an LA fund given this audience.
I wanted to add on our site, we've been trying to update as new funds are coming online. There are a lot of funder collaboratives happening right now, depending on your focus area. We will keep pushing out that information as it comes online. But that, I know sometimes our website is hard to navigate, but within that blue band up at the top, the latest information is there. And Annie, as you guys provide that information to us, we can push it out as well. So try to make it easy. We know you guys are getting a lot of emails about a lot of opportunities. So anything we can do to centralize that information, we will do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely be sharing
CNM it. And,
Yep.
CNM site, and I think Southern California grant makers have done a great job of just putting everything in one place for you all to just be able to look through all the potential funding sources, whether it be loan funds or grant funds.
A few questions on PPP. Common question has been people that everyone's been told to go to their banks, talk to your bank first. But what if your bank is not doing PPP loans or has been otherwise inaccessible? Advice for organizations on, I don't know, other avenues of applying for PPP through other banks, or just should you not even try for PPP if your bank is just being a brick wall? Just what do you do if your bank has become the obstacle?
That is a really great question. I'm so sorry folks are having that experience. We have heard that a lot. I will say that one that we have been pointing folks to that has been a very responsive source is CRF. They are an SBA lender, and they are specific. They have a specific. Sorry, I don't know how to send you the link, Erin. But if you look up crfusa.com, you can send a link out to everybody. They have a questionnaire that you can submit to about your interest, and someone will get back to you about that. And I can't tell you how fast, but we have heard from all of our partners that this has been the best way to be able to get someone at least to start answering your questions about the potential. And we've also heard folks just going to community banks. If your bank is a large entity, a large financial institution, and they haven't been responsive or aren't participating, it is worth at least having some reaching out by phone to some of the local banks that may be in your community or in your area. We've been hearing from all of our clients that that's been the most successful route for organizations. Although, like the question that was posed, they might have prerequisites of who they are prioritizing, those that already have an existing account with them. In that case, I would point you to reach out to CRF. They're a great partner of NFF and very responsive. And I think there was guidance earlier this week also, and what I've heard from many sources is to only apply at one place. Even if you are asking questions, you should definitely do your diligence to call around, but to not actually submit an application with more than one bank or financial institution. And if folks are asking for any type of upfront fee or promising you that they are going to get you PPP, please be aware of that. We don't want any predatory sources to be preying on our nonprofits at this point, but we know it's something that is going to happen. So, you know, know your rights, ask your questions, do your diligence before submitting any of your personal information to anybody.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of scams going on right now. Unfortunately, it looks like CRF has also stopped taking applications. We just shared the link and a number of people have shared that. So that's a bummer. But
I am sorry to hear that. Reach out to your local community banks. And if we find of any other sources, we will send it on to Regina and Aaron to be able to post alongside any resources.
Yep. So a couple questions about funders and banks for right now. Are funders more likely to be understanding of nonprofits taking SBA loans during this situation? And moving forward, do you think that financial institutions will be more or less willing to extend lines of credit? Are they going to become more conservative, more generous? Just kind of pulse on where the banks and funders are thinking right now.
For funders, for all the conversations that we've had, yes. I think what we're trying to understand is what is the sector and the financial statements going to look like for organizations after we come out of this, and what will they be reviewing? And I think there's a general understanding that there may be more debt for organizations as a whole in the sector. And that's something, given everyone going through this right now, to understand that this is part of responding and keeping our organizations intact through this crisis. So I would definitely say that all the funders, and we work with most of the national funders and the LA funders, will understand that why you've been taking out debt. As far as will there be more lines of credit available to nonprofit organizations, our hope is yes. Our hope is that there's going to be a better understanding of how to lend to nonprofits. That's traditionally why organizations have come to NFF for their lines of credit. It may be because traditional financial institutions or their bankers may not understand the nonprofit finance model as much, and so they have more difficulty doing their diligence around those nonprofit organizations or being able to lend to them against collateral such as any grant agreements, which CDFIs typically are more understanding of, because we are nonprofits ourselves and understand the value of what a grant agreement brings. So hopefully there's going to be more understanding out of this, and that there will be more philanthropically backed funds that's going to allow lending to nonprofit organizations.
Great. I thought this was a really nice question. This person comes from a relatively new organization with pretty low overhead and was successful in fundraising last year. So they're in a pretty healthy financial position. Should they still consider pursuing some of the grants made available, or is it best to leave those for organizations that may need them more right now?
So from what I understand, one of the requirements for PPP and for EIDL is to show that you've been impacted by COVID-19 financially. So there is a statement that you would have to make to say, that you have been impacted. I don't know what the diligence will look like around that, but I think it's something for you as a leader to consider of, have you been impacted? Are you expecting any impacts, even though you're not actually feeling it right now? There may be something as far as your giving that you're going to tap into in the future, and that is an impact that you're going to have. I think that would be the consideration on whether to apply or not.
That makes sense. This is a great question too. Do you know if there's any centralized place where people can report PPP scams if they're being asked to, people that are charging them $1,000 for applications? Is there any place to report that right now?
I'm so sorry you're going through that. I would hope there should be from what I've heard, I have not looked into it, but on the SBA website, there is a place to submit questions. So I would think that you could submit that actual comment in and of itself too. I will look that up after this and add it to this deck if I can find a link for that. Our team has told us that there is questions you can submit that they're coming back to beaming and collecting and answering, but definitely being able to report that should be very important. Thank you for
Yeah.
asking
You know,
that.
we'll also reach out to the Attorney General's office and see if there's a link there to the Veritable Trust Division, because those guys are the regulators for our industry, and there may be at the state level something they could do. So if you
Yeah.
wanna, we'll put that up on the site if we get an answer as well. Synchronize with you, Annie.
Yes. Thanks, Regina.
And yeah, tangentially, have you heard of lendistry.com? Somebody mentioned that they were able to successfully submit a primary application for PPP through lendistry.com and didn't know, hadn't heard of them before, was not sure what their reputation was. So I know there's a lot of places springing up right now, and it's hard to make sense of who's legit and who's not.
I have not heard of them before. I'm looking at it right now. It says they're a SBA lender. I think on the SBA site now, you can search for lenders in your area. I assume that you could probably search by these names also, and it would probably just be worth checking before you submit your financial information. It sounds like you already did, but I think definitely worth checking them out, or going to the I think the Business Bureau to check out. It looks like they have a license number also to just be able to do their diligence around who they are, but I have not heard of them.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's lendistry.com. Somebody asked, and somebody else mentioned that Lendistry is a valid CDFI, that they're a broker for them in good times, and there's been some
Great.
turnover. So got a little bit of social proof here that they exist and are legit.
Yeah. That's great, and they have a link, so that's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got here. Here's a question from a smaller organization that does not have a 10K budget for an audit, and therefore might be left out of many of these grants that they could be able to apply for. Are there specific grants that you apply for that require an audit? Does that make sense?
For grants, so for grant dollars, those are those dollars that you would just receive, and it's not debt. I think that, Regina, I think you all have a source of what the response grants pools are right now. Is that right? And then I think Southern California Grant Makers also has a list of those sources. And I would say right now, there is not going to be a requirement around audits, I think, for a lot of them, just given that they want to support organizations of all sizes. But I can't say that for sure. I think once you look at the links, you'll be able to tell what the requirements are to be able to apply. I don't know of any of the funds that are specific to those smaller organizations that don't have audits available. But there are funders. Philanthropy does grant out, and even for the SBA lending too, you don't necessarily need to have an audit to be able to access that. You just need to have filed your taxes.
Gotcha. One more question on the scam front. The New York Times had suggested a website called Cabbage with a K as a lender that had a lot of bad reviews from the Consumer Protection Bureau, but maybe this person's only option. Just, have you heard of them? Any idea if they're legit?
I'm sorry, I have not. And I think I would say maybe looking at the reviews and what was bad about them, about the reviews, if it was just their engagement, or if there was actually any fraudulent activities, it may be worth a try, as long as it's not actually fraudulent activities. It might just be bad customer service, which may be something that you could deal with. But looking at what the nature of those reviews are.
Yeah.
You know, Annie,
again,
on Monday, when the SBA was presenting, they were saying that there was just a lot of fraud, and that people really needed to be careful. So I would trust the SBA site, and I would trust your bank. If you don't have a relationship, from what we heard from the SBA, just be careful.
Yeah. Here's a good question about donor relations and kind of grant reporting. There are a lot of challenges with collecting data and demographic information right now. A lot of grants ask for reporting. Frontline staff is already pretty taxed, and don't want to put people, in harm's way when trying to, collect this kind of data. So kind of curious, any any advice from either Annie or Regina, I guess, on this about, talking with your donors and, relaxing reporting requirements for grants during this time period?
I think it's something that you should ask for, and we're encouraging all of our clients to do that also, and we're doing that with our funders as well. It's definitely a time to revisit all of the grant contracts that you have right now and talking about any of the requirements, including reporting at this point.
Absolutely, I would agree. It's the time to communicate and to let them know what you're concerned about and to see where there's some flexibility. I think everyone's trying to help the best they can. And if they hear from you what would make a difference and what creates some obstacles, I think people are really working to make it easier for you to do the work you need to do.
Yeah. There's not a great answer to this question, but kind of curious, maybe both of your responses with kind of all of the confusion and obstacles with the rollout of PPP. Just what is each of your confidence level that these loans will actually be, distributed and then forgiven in this time period that they've laid out?
I was thinking this morning, I wish I had a crystal ball, because boy, it would be valuable right now.
I feel like it's just hard to tell right now with not knowing who's actually getting through, whether businesses are getting prioritized over nonprofits or not. I hate to say that, but we just don't know at this point of, what's going on the back end even after these applications are being submitted. Even with guidance actually coming out and being things, more clarity coming out or changes happening around requirements.
Well, I would say, if the question is, are we confident that money will move through the system? Yes. It's, billions of dollars in the last week that as they rolled out, the banks and all the key stakeholders had questions about how to work this. And what we know is it'll probably be oversubscribed. We know that it won't go as quickly as everyone hoped last week. We know that it's important that you have a relationship with your banker. I know not everyone does. You need to be thinking about what Annie's presentation was about earlier, about what your financial position is and where some of these tools could be helpful for you. But you really did take a 30,000-foot view first. All this money was designed to keep people working and have money moving through the system to get the economy back up and running. And some of that, we're hearing from banks that they're committed to supporting nonprofits in their community. And we're also hearing from banks that some of the direction that they received from the federal government was confusing. And so it's just a moving target. Am I confident money will move? Yes. Will it be quick? Probably not. And we've been talking to a lot of people that are trying to sort this out, which is why we thought it was so important. As you think about lines of credits and payroll protection and reimbursement, and even bridge loans, that's why this series is so important, that you hear from the folks that are on your side, on the nonprofit side.
Absolutely.
And, the most recent blog we put out said, this is great that it's coming out. We hope it comes out, and we hope that these resources become available quickly, but we are not saying that leaders should bank on it. It will be without it. And your cash flow projection is going to tell you how long can you last. What are those things you can do now that are actually within your control? Like SBA and what the decisions are going to be are out of our control, outside of you applying. But what are within your control? Who can you call to delay any of your potential expenses? Who can you call to get cash in the door more quickly that maybe you're expecting in a month or 2 months from now? Can you get those prepaid now?
Yeah, sorry, a lot of questions coming in through the chat here, but wanted to share something that one of our board members, Ella, who had helped organize this, had shared, which is that the LA County is launching an employer assistance grant program today, which I believe we're going to be having one more webinar a week from today where the county is going to be here talking about it, but I just posted all the details of that in the chat. We have not been briefed on that yet, so I don't think we're in a great position to answer questions on that yet, but just wanted to share that information along with everyone. Oh, looks like it might have closed in 8 minutes, so they might have been overwhelmed with some, yeah, looks like they were overwhelmed with the response and has already crashed, but I'm sure they'll be back up pretty soon, and clearly just emblematic of how, many people are trying to access these services right now. Another question, curious if you have heard responses from nonprofits that have been trying to use the EDD work sharing program, if people have made it through there successfully and what those experiences have been like.
I apologize, I have not heard about that program or what the experience has been like. I don't know if anyone else on the call has that could share anything in the chat, but these are great places to share with each other too.
Gotcha. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see, this is another one where I'm sure that the answer is no one has any clue right now, but somebody asked, if you apply for PPP and the fund runs out of money, will the applications be honored if Congress releases more funds, or will you need to reapply? So that's clearly a lot of levels of hypothetical situations in there. And I'm assuming the answer is nobody knows right now.
I would just have to just follow the SBA guidance and updates to understand what they share as the process.
I know on the work share side, I don't know the results yet, but I know over the last 10 days or so, what we saw that was so great and typical of all of you entrepreneurial leaders is if you had growing demand, you were looking to colleagues and partners to think about where there were organizations that could potentially create that added workforce for now. So that whole work share strategy, it seems, is moving, but how it's working, I don't know, other than what I had heard from Edie's in the last few days.
Gotcha. Here's another question about just sort of access to funders and foundations, sorry, that generally, they tend to fund the organizations that are established and have relationships. But for smaller nonprofits now that are suffering and losing employees, any advice on how to access funders, and foundations right now, if you don't already have those relationships?
That is a really great question, and we definitely recognize that in the field, and that especially impacts organizations led by people of color and serving people of color, and something that we continue to raise. I'd say, and I haven't looked at all of the funding, the response funding that's been available by different sources like California Community Foundation and Weingart, but I would say that I think they've been open calls to submit. So it may be worth that this is the opportunity to submit and to share your story, your financial story, as well as your impact in your services, and to I think just continue to partner with other organizations in your community that may have access. One of the things that we know, organizations that don't have financial capital necessarily, there's a lot of social capital and reputational capital amongst organizations, and to be able to tap into that, to understand places where that you might be able to share your story.
Yeah. Might have time for just a few more questions here, nearing the end of our session. Let's see what else we got.
Aaron, just wanted to add, what I've been hearing from philanthropy is, that the number of requests has exploded on their end as well. So as always, funders will always tell us on the corporate side and the private philanthropy side, make sure that what you're trying to accomplish is aligned with what they're investing in right now, and be as clear as you can be. about the difference you're trying to make, especially as it relates to what's happening with COVID-19, because the first line of defense right now is figuring out how to help with this current emergency. And folks are all struggling with how to do that, and be as proactive as possible.
Yeah, along that line too, somebody had asked, during kind of the 08-09 financial crisis, they had seen a lot of foundations kind of having to triage their applications and, make judgments on, who they thought was still going to be around and how to award their funding. And just kind of curious, are there similar parallels happening now? Just are foundations just completely inundated and just still getting through everything?
I've heard yes, and the things that we've been looking at from a macro perspective is that there seemed to be more of an understanding of what the impact would be out of that crisis, and that it was time limited. And this one, we just don't know. There's so much uncertainty of how long social distancing is going to last, what the ripple effects are going to be through the organizations, that it's a little harder to determine. And also, which was similar back then, is philanthropy, actually their corpuses currently having to, seeing those go down as well. So that's the money that they actually grant out, and managing that, but we are one to, they exist for a reason, for community, and that's something that we'll continue to message and push as well, even though they're managing their own investments. Like, this is what their funding is there for, is to support community.
Yeah. I think we got time for one more question. And this is one that we have been seeing coming up a lot, a kind of a standard question for PPP, which is for educational programs and nonprofits that work specifically in and around and with schools. This is an after-school tutoring program. Are they eligible for PPP funds when they were closed from March through May, and they won't be able to open up again until September?
So I've been reading about the guidance for PPP. It's really an average of what your payroll was for the last 12 months. And everything I've seen is that it could be an average from the 12 months since February, so counting 12 months back from there, or you can count the 12 months within 2019 and taking that average of headcount there, and then the average of salaries and wages for those 12 months also. So it's trying to account for seasonality within operations for organizations. But if you are only working during the summer and have staff, I'm sorry, I maybe didn't catch when the programming was, but if you're only after school, you're closed during the summer, then you would take the average of the whole 12 months.
Gotcha. And last question, this came in the chat here. Is there one site with all emergency fund opportunities for nonprofits? And I can say that there is not one exhaustive list. That I know that NFF's, the set that they have linked on the screen right now, is pretty exhaustive. At CNM, we're trying to be as exhaustive as we can, but there's just so much information flying around and so many funds kind of cropping up that have very short, application windows and stuff. So we're definitely going to continue to post new funds on our COVID-19 page as they become available, as I'm sure NFF and others will. But yeah, I don't know if there is any other singular place to go, as everybody's just kind of trying to keep up with the pace of information right now. But I don't know, any other places that you'd recommend people check out?
I think we've been trying to stay active. Every time we find a source that's really good and additive, we've been adding it to our page as far as tools and guidance. And then I think for you all, and I don't know if it's different than Philanthropy California, but I think the compilation of all the funding sources is a really great place.
Yes, that's a good one. Philanthropy California for sure has had a very good and growing index. Well, with that, we've reached the end of our hour. I want to thank Annie very much. This has been very informative, and we're glad you're able to join us. And thanks for everyone who was able to join today. As I mentioned, we'll be sending a follow-up email later today that has recordings of all 3 webinars from the week, all of the slides that were shared, all of the links that we mentioned. Please just make sure to check like your junk folder or your promotions tab, just in case it gets lost in there. but that will be coming out later today. And Regina, anything else to add before we close up?
Just thank you to all. Tomorrow we have the Lunch and Learn. We'll be talking about messaging and about working with your board. Really want to thank Annie. I know those were hard questions. There's a lot of confusion right now, so thank you for helping to clarify what we know and what we don't know. And thank you to all of you for spending the time.
Yeah, thanks everyone for everything you're doing. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.